Hello everyone, I know it's been a little while since I made a video, and I had some free time tonight, so I wanted to make a new one. As you can see, this is the third update that I'm going to be posting about my build here on YouTube, and specifically we're going to be talking about the recent overhaul I did to the chocolate room. Before I go any further, I want to mention if you want to see much more frequent updates than I post on YouTube or Planet Minecraft, to go into the description and click on the link to join my community Discord server that's focused entirely on Minecraft Willy Wonka builds, essentially. So if you're into this little niche of the Minecraft community, I think you'd enjoy it in there. I post updates almost daily, and then there's other people making their own factories who post in there very regularly as well. And if you have your own build, you're more than welcome to join and post it. And it's always fun to talk with other people about the builds we're all working on. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that in case anyone was interested. And this video is going to be a little bit informal. I don't have a script made or anything like that. It's just going to be me flying around and talking about what I changed since that last update about 3 months ago. Like I said, pretty much the whole thing has been focused on the chocolate room because I just wasn't very happy with how my chocolate room looked. So we're just going to get right into it here. I'm going to try my best to make this video significantly shorter than my last update that ended up being about 40 minutes long combined between the two episodes. So I'm going to try to do this a little bit quicker. But as you can see, walking into the chocolate room, I don't know if it'll be immediately evident, but the whole room was rebuilt from scratch. Almost nothing was left untouched. And we'll go through this in much more detail now, but I'm kind of just going to do a little walk around as I'm talking here. So like I just said, pretty much everything was rebuilt. The only things that were not touched were the pipe machine and the Candy Viking ship. And if we want to get really technical, the walls of the structure itself and these columns here were also untouched, but everything else has been changed in some way. And really the main reason, aside from I just think it could look better, is that the set in the movie is so interesting. It's really hard to nail down exactly how it looked in person, even with the behind the scenes pictures that were shown. It seems like almost any picture you see, even if it's of the exact same area, will look different from picture to picture. So I tried my best to recreate it as good as reasonably possible. And the main thing that I noticed the movie had that my room did not was verticality, and we're kind of getting a good sense of that here as I walk down to the river. The set in the movie was very, very large, but surprisingly it was very tall, or I should say the elevation changed a lot. So when you're down at the river here in the movie, if you look up to the sides, you're almost kind of down in a little bit of a valley like we see right here and we see over there. You should be able to see the rolling hills towering over you. And then this area over here, the pathway winding down to the river, is like that as well, although not quite as dramatic as the banks on the sides over there. So it starts off very gently sloped, and then the closer you get to the river, the more dramatic it becomes. And my original chocolate room really lacked that feature, and that's kind of the defining feature of making this terrain look good. So originally, once I realized this, I was thinking that, well, maybe I can just kind of band-aid the problem and modify what I already had a little bit to make it look better. And after fiddling around with that for an hour or two, I realized that just wasn't going to be possible with the current way the room was set up. It needed to basically be completely redone. And so that's what I did. I was just mentioning how the room has so much verticality. My original chocolate room was basically built 5 to 10, depending on the area, blocks too low. So I didn't really have to delete the old ground. I could just sort of build over top of it. So I'm not going to show it, but if I were to go underneath the ground here, we would essentially see the old shaping of the hills from the old chocolate room. I just built over top of it. That's how I was able to do it. I say quickly with huge emphasis because I build very slowly, especially because I don't have a lot of free time anymore. So I really only have a few hours in the evenings during a day to work on it. And, you know, usually I'm not playing Minecraft every day after work, so it took a long time. But this shot, I think, shows the best how much the vertical aspect of this room changed. I don't have a picture of the old room pulled up for comparison, but if you go back to any of my older videos, especially my video, the Chocolate Room Showcase, you'll see how much my old room didn't have any of this terrain properly modeled over here. One of the things I found that was very surprising from the set is because they built it out of foam, it was not CGI like a lot of people think. Because the set was actually practical, they used foam, which is a very lightweight material, and a lot of the little, I guess you could almost call them foothills on the side of the room, are actually just spheres. So you might be looking at these and saying, wow, you kind of took the lazy way out and just went into World Edit and spawned in some spheres and placed them on the ground, but that's actually how it's supposed to look. So if you pull up the movies and pictures, you'll see that a lot of these hills are actually just perfectly circular, with some of them having little carved out areas like this. So that's what I did. That's what all these over here are as well. So that was the number one thing that needed to be changed, was the verticality. The second of the three main things we're going to be talking about that needed improved was the candy in the room itself. So for context, I started building this map in September of 2023, and I shared it online for the first time in February of 2024. And as I'm recording this, it's now February of 2025. The map has been publicly shown to people for over a year at this point, and we're coming up on, about a year and a half of me building this map. And in that time frame, I think I've gotten significantly better at building, and also significantly better at adapting things from pictures that I'm looking at. And, you know, the candy in my original chocolate room just really did not look good. In fact, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to load up real quick an old save from the original chocolate room, just so we can see how much different the candy looks. And then we'll come back here and I'll go in more detail about what I changed. Okay, so here we are in the second to most recent version of the chocolate room before I completely changed everything. And I think if you can't tell immediately, the more you look, you'll see how much the new version looks better. Not even talking about just the landscape. If we're just talking about the candy itself, you can see how much less detailed and blocky everything is, and honestly, how empty the room looks. In my chocolate room showcase video, I mentioned that the set in the movie didn't have a ton of props, which left too much open space, so I went ahead and added in my own candy in areas that wasn't present in the movie as a way to try to fill in some of that space. And I realized in rebuilding the new chocolate room that's actually not true at all. There were a lot of props in the movie, but they were really low to the ground and sort of small, which is hard to do in Minecraft. In my original build here, before I was really that good with recreating things and putting detail onto different props essentially, we're left with what you see here, where there's just so much open space and all the candy looks kind of similar. It's kind of all made out of just full blocks. It just really doesn't look that good. So we're going to go back to the new version, and then I'll show in a little bit more detail what I did to fix that. Okay, so here we are back in the most current version of the chocolate room, and I think immediately you can just see how much more detailed everything is. Even though we're in a room that's about the exact same size. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But the main thing that I did was I tried to use a lot more items that were not full-size blocks. So in the old version, I had most of the details from the movie in their correct spots. You know, give or take. It wasn't perfect. This is much more accurate than the old version. But these trees over here, you know, they're made of full-size blocks, but what I did to try to make it look a little bit more interesting was to vary the color a little bit, because in the movie, the reflection of the lighting makes some of the like sides of the trees look brighter and darker than others. And then more importantly, when it came to the branches on top in the movie, they come out and they're like very skinny branches that curl around in all different directions. So I figured, well, the best thing I could really do in Minecraft would be to use fences, and since there's so many different color fences in the game now, it can really blend in quite nice. And then on those branches in the movie, there's little sort of like even smaller twigs or little pieces of candy on top, and I figured candles would look pretty good for that. So that's how I sort of made these candy trees look better, and it's the same thing over here, although they're a little bit different. These trees do not have so much of these small branches on top as they do have these sort of circular candies on top, and this is still a little bit difficult to recreate, so I just sort of made the smallest sphere I could really reasonably do. But in the movie, they were very bumpy, and they had little smaller circles of candy growing on top, so I figured, you know, buttons would look pretty good for that. And, you know, if you go up and you stare at the thing really intently like this, you're like, okay, it's just kind of some blocks randomly placed within a weird shape with some buttons. But if you're looking at it, you know, as a whole thing here, they really do look quite good, and they're much more detailed than my old versions, certainly. So I'm very happy with that. So that's probably the single biggest thing that I did to improve the candy. And then for other candy, like these trees here, so I stuck with using the mushroom because that's sort of is built into the texture. But then there's also white spots on the mushrooms, and they have a little bit of a different texture to them. So originally I just used white concrete, and I ended up looking a little bit too smooth. So the best thing I could really come up with as a substitute was diorite, but since it has the stone texture on there, it just makes it look a little bit more interesting and more accurate to the movie. And then I also used stairs to sort of smooth out the transition of the different angles and turns the stems take. I did try my best to model the direction of all of the bendiness as they are in the movie. And then probably, aside from using more smaller parts on the props themselves, is to solve the problem I was talking about of the landscape just looking too bare. I went ahead and tried to populate it with a lot more smaller objects. So in my old version even, I used the carpet where it's present in the movie. Something that I like to do for the little candy bushes is to just use coral. And since I'm using Axiom, I can place coral on non-natural blocks, like concrete here, so without them dying. But probably the single biggest thing that I started using were glass panes and buttons. So I kind of put these in areas around the props where it looked like in the movie there were sort of like stems or other little candies growing around the trees. A lot of the hillsides in the movie had little candy mushrooms or other pieces of candy growing out of the grass. So buttons, candles, and glass really looks good for that, in my opinion. And then also I just kind of realized that I unintentionally left a lot of the candy out that is easily recreated in Minecraft, even though it's all blocks. So there were a lot more of these candy pumpkins in the movie that I wasn't aware of, and there were a lot more of these sort of like weird short candy plants in areas of the movie that I just didn't notice. I only had them in a few spots before. So I think that really helps fill the room out so much more, and I think the candy just overall looks much more impressive. The last main point to talk about that I really wanted to improve was the lighting. So if you watch the 2005 movie, you'll probably notice that the whole tone of the movie is a little bit darker, literally darker. There just isn't as much light, especially compared to the 1970s version. And that's something that I thought I captured decently well in my old chocolate room. But upon going back and looking at it, and I think you'll agree from the clip I showed earlier, the whole room is just too bright. It doesn't have enough shadow, it doesn't have enough dramatic emphasis on certain terrain features. Because the room in the movie is lit by these overhead lights, which in the movie are natural light, but you know, to make it translate into Minecraft, I had to just put light blocks up in there. So these beams of light come down and they project onto the landscape. So what you're left with in the movie is some areas look a lot brighter than others. A good example of that are the high points of the terrain. So this tall hill over here, or the little arch bridges. or this outcropping over here, if you look in the movie, you'll see that they're actually much brighter than the rest of the grass. So over here in these areas, there's not really a good light source on this terrain, so there's more of a shadow. Same thing with this right here, because this tree is blocking some of the light coming down, not to mention the pipe machine, there's more of a shadow right here. And I think that translates really well into the game. I think you're left with a much more dramatic looking landscape if you can emphasize certain areas with light. So if this whole thing was basically one color, and I'll do that here, I can turn the brightness up. Let's just say to 100. I think you'll agree that this looks significantly worse because everything is the same shade. There is no depth, there's no shadows, it just doesn't look right. So if I put that back down to 0, which is how you would normally experience this room, you can see you only have light where I intentionally put the light, and I think it just looks a lot better. It's like, again, over here, like there's just not a lot of light over here. And that also came into play with the waterfall, which I'll talk about in a minute, but if you watch the movie, you'll notice that the waterfall itself is very well lit, and then the lower half of the wall is lit, but the upper half and also the sides are basically in darkness. And then these little towers over here are basically lit up from one side, and there's a beam of light hitting them right on this side and then on this side over here from the overhead lights. So I tried to replicate that by only having a focused light on one side and then having it gently dissipate off into nothing. And I think it just looks so much better than how I had it before. So yeah, I think the lighting, aside from the terrain modifications and just the more detailed candy, I think the lighting is the third thing that helps this room look so much better now. Aside from the candy and the landscape itself, I also completely deleted and rebuilt the waterfall area. I think the design of the 2005 waterfall is very interesting. The waterfall, for one, is just huge, but the wall that it goes over itself is actually a dam. It's very similar to something like Hoover Dam, if anyone's familiar with that, where this wall is basically holding back a bunch of chocolate and then the waterfall spills over on top. My original waterfall looked okay, but it wasn't great, so the way it should properly look is basically how it's built now. It curves this way on this axis, but it also curves going up and down like this. So my original version had the curve going vertical, but I did not have this curve going this way, so this wall was just flat. And the whole thing just looked too sterile and not interesting enough. So basically I spent an afternoon one weekend, I deleted it, and I painstakingly tried to plan out a more accurate looking shape for this wall. And another thing that I think looks a lot better now is these, I don't even know what these are, these cylinders with the kind of the window in front of them. They start up top, and then as it goes down, and then this wall curves inwards towards where I'm standing, they eventually disappear into the wall itself like this. So, obviously it's coming down on one axis at one depth level, and then it disappears into the wall before it reaches the chocolate. So my old version did not have that at all. It stuck out too far, so that these little cylinders actually went all the way down into the chocolate, and it wasn't accurate. So that's another thing that adding this extra curve in really helped with. And then I also rebuilt these towers just to try to make them look a little bit more accurate. The waterfall itself is actually the same exact size. It hasn't changed at all. I also rebuilt the little area at the bottom here where the chocolate collects. It's not too different from my original version, but it is a little bit larger. But I think you'll agree that this waterfall and the wall itself specifically is much more impressive looking. It has a lot more detail and more depth. I'll just show this for anyone who's interested. I think I showed this in my chocolate room showcase video a while back. But this is what the top of the wall is sort of supposed to look like. So the waterfall doesn't go all the way up to the ceiling. There's supposed to be some open area in the back. And then on the other side of these towers, the wall actually is at a lower depth, I guess you could say. So the middle part is obviously up here, and then it drops down to lower down there. And that's what gives you the nice effect of depth is having that lowered down. And then also having an open space up there so you're not right up against the ceiling is, in my opinion, the way to make the waterfalls look the most accurate. I said I was going to mention it earlier, and I almost forgot when I was talking about the size of the room remaining almost the same. Just to make this new curve for the waterfall fit in on the wall here, the dam wall, I had to extend the room back by about 10 blocks just so I could fit this in without compromising the landscape over here. If I had kept it how it was, the waterfall would have come out to about right here, which is just too close to the bridge. And I would have basically had to lose all of this landscape over here, which is, this area isn't shown in the movie very much, but there are behind the scenes pictures that show this much more accurately. And it kind of is supposed to slope down right up against the waterfall like this, so I didn't want to lose that, so I had to extend the room by about 10 blocks. Lastly, what I'm going to do before the video's over here is just showcase a few particular areas that I really think look a lot better than my old version, so if you want to go back into my old videos and watch. And that's mostly on this side of the room over here. This little, area of the terrain, I don't know a good way to describe it, basically just didn't exist in my last chocolate room video, but I really like it because it really exemplifies the elevation that I was talking about earlier, where you slowly come up on here, but then it drastically comes down to the river height almost, and then it has a nice very harsh curve, which I think looks really good. And then it gradually slopes back up to the bridge over here, and then it has multiple levels, so there's the level on top here and the level on top over here as well. I just think it looks really good. I'm very happy with how it turned out, and my old version just didn't have this. The river banks themselves are supposed to be very low to the river. So another area I wanted to talk about because of that was over here. So this might look like a pretty boring area because there's not really anything on the grass over here. But this is actually the exact area that Augustus falls into the river. In fact, if we want to be really technical, he would basically be standing basically right in this spot where he fell in. And my old version didn't really have that accurately represented. The whole thing was too small and not obvious enough. So I really wanted to redo this area and make it look as close to the film as I think I could have made it. So now if you come down this path here up to the river bed, or to the riverbank, this is exactly the view he would have had of the whole thing as it happened. So I'm very happy with that. And then the last major area I want to specifically point on is basically this view right here, and I think this really shows well how large the room really is, because I was looking at some behind the scenes pictures of this exact angle almost, and there were people standing here, and the landscape in the background just towered over them. It was much, much taller than them. And my old version of this landscape probably only maxed out about on this level right here. So everything above here was not represented at all. So I think it really gives a nice sense of scale, and I think it's represented well in Minecraft, because some things just don't translate well, but I think this translated very well. It really makes you feel kind of small in this huge, extraordinary landscape. So I'm really happy with how the room feels when you're walking in this area over here. So I think that's pretty much about everything that I did. I'm sure I'm missing a few small details, but this video really is just an overall kind of sense of what I changed. And I hope you guys all like the new chocolate room as much as I do. This is now by far my favorite area of the build, and I just think it makes my old version look awful in comparison, so I'm really happy with how this turned out. Once again, before I go, I just want to mention, if you want to see more frequent updates on the build, like more day-to-day things, really small things that don't warrant its own video or its own Planet Minecraft post, to join my community Discord server, where I post those little things almost on a daily basis. So I want to thank you for watching this video. I hope it was enjoyable and informative, and I will see you in the next one.